The room was glowing with Christmas lights. The fireplace crackled softly behind the tree, casting flickers of warmth across the gift-wrapped boxes stacked neatly beneath it. The scent of cinnamon pine and roasted turkey hung thick in the air, wrapping around us like tradition. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, where my cousin Natalie poured wine for the women, and someone in the living room was recounting a story from last Christmas. I stood quietly near the tree, holding a small gift in my trembling hands, a box I had spent days choosing for my father. The tag read, "To Dad, from Melissa." Just 5 words, but they had carried so much weight. I had chosen the watch carefully, engraved it, even hoping, maybe foolishly, that this time he would see me, that this year things might be different. My heart thudded hard as I approached him. He sat at the head of the living room, flanked by my brother Kyle and Uncle Robert. Everyone fell quiet when I stepped forward. I offered the box, extending it with both hands like a peace offering. He glanced up slowly, the flicker of disinterest already plain on his face. "What's this?" he muttered flatly. "It's just something I thought you might like," I said, forcing a smile I barely felt. He stared at the box for a second, then shook his head and laughed, dry and sharp. "You always try too hard, Melissa. Always desperate for attention. Why even bother? You're worthless." The room froze. The laughter died instantly. Glasses paused mid-air. A single ornament on the tree tinkled as if reacting to the shock. My fingers stiffened around the box. His words landed not like bullets, but like dull blades meant to cut slowly and deeply. My breath caught. I looked around, waiting, hoping for someone to say something. Kyle stared at the floor. Aunt Linda sipped her wine like she hadn't heard a thing. My mother, sitting just across from him, didn't even blink. She just said, "Frank, not now," as if my humiliation was merely a minor inconvenience to the evening's mood. Worthless. That word didn't just sting. It echoed inside me, reverberating against every suppressed memory, every act of service I had done for this family. 10 years of sending money. Holidays spent cleaning up after everyone. Birthdays celebrated alone because Kyle had a game or Dad was working. And still, I had come back always trying, always hoping. And now, in front of everyone, he had decided to finally say it aloud. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there holding that box, my palms slick with sweat. The silence stretched. My cousin Natalie opened her mouth but said nothing. Then my father looked away back to the television, dismissing me as though I were no longer standing there. I turned, slowly, walked to the hallway, and stepped into the guest room I was using. My fingers unwrapped the ribbon, carefully opened the box, and stared at the watch. Silver. Clean. Quietly expensive. I had imagined him smiling. I had imagined he would say thank you. I had imagined he would hug me. I imagined wrong. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I finally let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. My entire chest ached. Not from the words alone, but from the decades that had led to them. All the years of silent slights, ignored sacrifices, and praise poured endlessly on Kyle, while I stood in the background, steady and invisible. That night, while the others laughed again in the other room, while Dad unwrapped gifts from Kyle with loud approval and fake gratitude, I sat alone, thinking. That word he used, worthless, had only one meaning. He didn't see me. He never had. And yet he had no idea. No idea that I had already discovered the truth. No idea that tucked inside my purse beneath a bundle of tissues and receipts was a photo. Not a gift, not a card, but a picture. A snapshot of him walking hand in hand with a woman not my mother. A woman with a little girl who called him Daddy. And for the first time in my life, as his words rang in my ears and my face burned with shame, I smiled. Because I had something he didn't expect. The truth. And soon everyone else would know it too. The word worthless echoed in my head, long after the lights dimmed and the final gifts were unwrapped. I lay on the stiff guest bed, staring at the popcorn ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses just a wall away. They were celebrating. They were moving on. Meanwhile, my father's words played on repeat in my mind, not as a fresh wound, but as the confirmation of something I had known deep down for years. I was the one who showed up, the one who paid, the one who carried the weight. And somehow, I was still the one they pushed aside. I remembered the month my dad's blood pressure medication had run out and the pharmacy refused to refill until a balance was paid. Mom called me crying, said they couldn't afford it. I paid the $387 bill immediately without hesitation. I remembered Kyle's tuition shortfall 2 years ago, the one that came up right before the semester started. Mom and Dad didn't ask Kyle to delay school. They asked me to lend the difference $3,000. I transferred it that night. It was never returned, and it was never called a loan again. I remembered the time the heater broke in late November. They called me panicked, cold, and desperate. Within 24 hours, I had covered the $2,800 repair. I remembered birthdays where no one called. I remembered Christmas cards with Kyle's name bolded in gold and mine missing entirely. I remembered my mother telling me half laughing that I was always so serious like your father's accountant. I remembered the Thanksgiving I spent in Scrubs double-shifted saving lives while they sat at the table without even texting me hello. I had been the safety net, the emergency fund, the invisible daughter with a bank account they could depend on. My job as a nurse was brutal during the pandemic, the kind of exhausting that didn't leave when you clocked out. Patients coded in my arms. I held hands of the dying when their families couldn't visit. I came home every day broken, but still, when my parents called, I answered. When they asked, I gave. Not once did they ask if I was okay. Not once did they send anything, no card, no package, no thanks. I was their fallback, their lifeline, but never their pride. I thought of all the times I showed up, the flights I booked on holidays, the groceries I delivered during lockdown, the Amazon orders I placed when Kyle wanted new speakers or Dad needed new tools. None of it was ever enough to earn a kind word, let alone respect. And now, after all of it, my father had looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless. I had paid thousands of dollars over the years, covered bills, replaced appliances, paid for groceries, chipped in for medical insurance. I had gone without vacations, without a better apartment, without upgrading my car so that I could help them. And still, I was the one he dismissed like an inconvenience. This wasn't about a single insult. It was about a pattern, a lifetime of being treated like a tool, a convenience, a last resort. It was about being overlooked, undervalued, and unacknowledged. I was the one who was always okay, always dependable, always expected to endure. And I had. For 33 years, I endured. I thought that by giving enough, I could finally be seen. That one more check, one more sacrifice would make them look at me and say, "We're proud of you, Melissa." But they never did. They only saw what I could provide. My worth had been measured in dollars and duty, not love, not pride, not joy, not even basic decency. And now, with one sentence, my father had summed it all up. Why even bother? You're worthless. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even hurt. What I felt was something colder, something sharper, a clarity that had taken decades to arrive. For the first time, I stopped making excuses for them. I stopped wondering what more I could do. I started wondering why I had done so much, and that shift, that silent pivot inside me, was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand fully. But I knew one thing for sure: I was done paying to be ignored. I was done sacrificing to be insulted, and I was done being the only one who remembered everything while they forgot everything that mattered. Before I ever knew what money was, I had already learned who mattered in our family, and it was never me. I was 5 years old when I first noticed how my mother smiled wider at Kyle's tantrums than at my spelling bees. He was 3, then a chubby ball of noise and needs, and she called him her little genius for stacking blocks. I had just learned to read full sentences but got only a distracted nod and a reminder not to be too proud. By 7, I was doing chores before school while Kyle played with cereal in front of the TV. If I folded towels wrong, Mom would sigh like I had disappointed her soul. If Kyle spilled milk on the carpet, she'd call him just a curious boy. That difference, it wasn't subtle. It was the entire foundation of our household. Dad worked long hours at the factory and came home tired and impatient. When he was around, his attention swung like a spotlight, and it only ever landed on Kyle. "That's my boy," he'd say when Kyle brought home a D+ on a spelling test but managed to draw a comic strip of monsters. Creative, he called it. When I got straight A's, he said, "That's expected." Not once did he say he was proud. Not once did he say thank you for trying. When I was 10, Kyle broke his wrist falling off his skateboard. For 2 weeks, he was treated like royalty. No chores, favorite dinners, Dad even took off work to drive him to checkups. I once fainted during a school field trip from dehydration. My teacher called home. No one came. I took the bus home alone. Mom said I needed to drink more water. No sympathy, just critique. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the rule. Christmases were worse. I'd get books or clothes, practical things. Kyle got gadgets, bikes, things with flashing lights. One year I saved up my allowance and made everyone handmade gifts. I glued and painted little photo frames, found family pictures, wrapped them myself. On Christmas morning they laughed. "These are cute," Mom said, placing hers aside without a glance. Kyle got a drone. He crashed it into a tree within a week, and Dad just bought him another one. When I turned 16, I got my mother's old cell phone 2 generations behind and cracked. Kyle turned 16 and got a used Honda with a red bow and full insurance. Dad beamed that day, told everyone at work, bragged about his son on Facebook. No one posted about my college acceptance letter. Not a word. At school, I was known as the reliable one. Quiet, focused, mature. At home, I was the background noise. The default babysitter, the laundry doer, the daughter who made dinner when Mom was too tired, the one who stayed home when Kyle wanted the car. When I finally got into nursing school, I cried alone in my room. I knew they wouldn't help me pay, but I still told them, hoping. Mom said, "Well, nursing's a good backup career." Dad said, "You'll figure it out, you always do." They didn't come to my orientation. They didn't ask if I needed help moving. I carried boxes into my dorm with help from a roommate's dad. No one from my family called that day. Kyle got a going-away party when he left for community college. Banners, cake, extended family. Mom even cried. He failed 2 classes his first semester, and they still said he was figuring himself out. When I was working 3 jobs and keeping a 3.9 GPA, they told me I was too intense. When Kyle dropped out, they bought him tools for a new business idea. He had many. None lasted. First, a lawn care startup, then video editing, then reselling sneakers. I paid off credit card debt they had co-signed in his name. Quietly, without complaint. Because if I didn't, the phone calls would come. "Melissa, just help him this once. You know he's trying. You're doing okay. He needs this." So I helped, again and again. Because I thought maybe if I carried enough, they'd see I was worth something. Maybe if I became indispensable, they'd finally choose me. But they never did. And the real wound wasn't the absence of praise. It was the belief seeded early and watered often that I had to earn love that Kyle received for free. It was the silence when I cried, the shrugs when I succeeded, the way I had been made to feel like second-tier family in the home I grew up in. I internalized that hierarchy so deeply that I didn't even question it as an adult. I just kept performing, kept showing up, kept giving. I built a life on their terms, quiet, efficient, generous, but never loud, never messy, never enough to disturb Kyle's spotlight. And in return, I got their silence, their expectations, their unyielding demand for more. Looking back, I wasn't surprised Dad called me worthless. He had spent my whole life treating me that way. The only difference now was that I had finally stopped pretending it wasn't true. By the time I was in my late 20s, the pattern was no longer subtle. It had become a rhythm reliable, suffocating, and unchanging. Every phone call from my parents started with pleasantries, but always ended with some version of need. The car needed repairs. Kyle was struggling again. The mortgage was falling behind. Could I just help this one last time? And I always did. Always. Because part of me still hoped that one day they would remember all of it. That one day they would stop treating my labor as expected and start treating me like family. But that day never came. When I got promoted to lead nurse in the emergency department, a job that took years of brutal work, I called to tell them. Mom said, "That's nice. Have you talked to Kyle? He's trying out something new." I had just signed on for a role with higher pay and more responsibility overseeing trauma cases and managing a team. But it was dismissed like I had said. I bought a new pair of shoes. When Kyle started his latest business selling custom sneakers on TikTok, they posted about it online like he was Steve Jobs. Dad wrote that Kyle was visionary. I was never mentioned. I told myself not to care. I buried the bitterness. I let it sit in my chest like a dull ache I couldn't remove. But it stayed. One night, after a long shift, I found myself staring at my fridge door. On it were 3 Post-it notes, one with my grocery list, one with my next shift schedule, and one that read, "Mortgage, due 15th. Their mortgage, not mine." I was 33 and still renting a small apartment with paper-thin walls and a leaky bathroom faucet I hadn't had time to fix. Meanwhile, my parents lived in a 2-story house they couldn't afford without me. They had no idea that every time I covered a bill, it came from a place of sacrifice. I had given up traveling. I skipped meals. I passed on therapy, on new shoes, on everything that might have made my life feel like mine. But none of it mattered to them. They treated my support as something automatic. Not once did they ask what I had to give up. Not once did they consider that I had a life too. Then came the subtle humiliations. Last Easter, I came home after a double shift to surprise them. I brought flowers, dinner rolls, even a chocolate cake. Mom looked at me and said, "You look tired, Melissa. You should really try to do something about those under-eye circles." Kyle showed up late with nothing but a story about how he might be starting a podcast. They listened like he was announcing a presidential run. At Kyle's birthday, Dad gave a toast calling him the light of our family. I had paid for the food. I had cleaned the house. I wasn't mentioned. The next week, Mom called asking for help covering Kyle's back rent. Again. When I hesitated, she said, "You know how he gets. He just needs a little push. You're doing fine." I wasn't fine. I was drowning under quiet resentment built layer by layer over a decade. And yet, I said yes. Again. Because no one else would. Because if I didn't, I was the bad daughter, the ungrateful one. And I couldn't bear the guilt. But things reached a new level during Thanksgiving, just 1 month before the Christmas disaster. I had taken the week off to prepare. I cooked everything, brought wine, cleaned the house. I decorated with care. And when the day came, they moved the dinner to their place last minute, said it was more convenient. I packed up all the food, drove it over, and they barely acknowledged it. That night, Kyle got applause for a store-bought pie. I got silence. At dinner, I mentioned a case I had handled at work, a child saved from cardiac arrest. Dad interrupted Kyle. "Tell them about your idea for that pet supply app." I sat there, lips pressed together, the edges of my pride crumbling. Mom chimed in, "You always bring the mood down, Melissa. Why not just enjoy the meal?" That was when something began to shift. It wasn't rage. It was weariness. A bone-deep exhaustion that settled into my spine. I realized they didn't just forget my worth, they refused to see it, and that was no longer something I could accept. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew one thing with certainty. I was no longer going to sit in silence while they cheered for Kyle and ignored the woman who made their life possible. Not anymore. The drive to my parents' house on Christmas morning felt different. The snow was soft on the roads, the sky a pale gray, and the neighborhood was dressed in wreaths and ribbons. But there was no warmth inside me, just a weight in my chest, heavy and silent. I had packed the same way I always did food, wine, neatly wrapped gifts. I had even bought my dad a new watch engraved with the words, "For every second you've guided me." The words stung now thinking back. At the time, I still clung to the hope that maybe this time things would be different. That maybe the months of silence, the dismissals, the financial strain I had quietly carried would fade away, and they would just for once see me. That illusion shattered the moment I stepped into their living room and felt the shift in air. Dad was already seated, feet up, holding a beer, Kyle beside him, laughing about something I couldn't hear. Mom didn't even look up when I walked in. She pointed toward the kitchen and said, "You know where to put everything?" I set the bags down carefully, unwrapping the foil from the turkey I had roasted overnight, watching the steam rise like smoke from a battlefield. My battlefield. For the next hour, I moved through their house like a ghost, setting the table, pouring wine, lighting candles. I heard Kyle talking about a new crypto venture, something he barely understood but believed would make him millions. Dad nodded along, impressed. I paused in the hallway, holding a tray of glasses, listening. And then I heard it. Kyle, laughing, said Melissa's probably got it covered. That's what she does. Pays for everything while we live. My father replied, "She better. Not like she's got anyone else to spend it on. That wasn't a joke. It wasn't even said in anger. It was just matter of fact the truth as they saw it. And that's when it happened. That was the moment something inside me cracked, and not in a way that could be patched over. I stood there holding the tray fingers, gripping the edges so hard my knuckles turned white. My ears rang, my vision blurred, and the weight of every ignored effort pressed against my chest. But I didn't cry. I walked in. I served the wine. I smiled. I sat at the table while they toasted to Kyle's potential and ignored my existence. And then I handed my father the watch. The room was full. Uncles, aunts, cousins. I had waited for this moment, believed in it, the redemption arc. He opened it slowly, looked at it for half a second, and then said loud enough for the room to fall silent, "Why even bother? You're worthless." There it was. No filter, no disguise. The truth said with the ease of a man commenting on the weather. Laughter stopped. Glasses froze. The word echoed, bouncing off the garland and silverware. I stood there holding my breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to object. No one did. Mom barely reacted. Kyle smirked, and that was the breaking point. Not just the insult, but the silence that followed, the acceptance, the agreement. In that instant, the scales fell from my eyes. It wasn't just that they didn't value me. It was that they never had. That every time I thought I was getting closer, I was just proving I could be used more. I left the room, my face hot, my chest tight. I walked into the study and sat in Dad's old leather chair. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from focus, from rage held so tightly it had turned into purpose. I scrolled to the folder I had saved months ago, the one labeled simply "For Later." Inside were pictures, screenshots, a timeline, messages between Dad and a woman named Julie, photos of them at a lake house, of him kissing her forehead, and in one, a little girl, Emma, smiling up at him, calling him Daddy in a text. I had found them by accident. Months ago, during a visit, I'd borrowed his tablet to check my email. The messages had popped up unhidden, careless. I had saved them, unsure why, unsure what to do. Now I knew. He had called me worthless. But I was about to show him exactly how much power I had. I didn't tell anyone right away, not even Janine. I carried the knowledge like a live wire in my chest, knowing that once I spoke it aloud, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. But the weight of silence was starting to crush me. 2 days after Christmas, I met Janine for coffee. She had been my best friend since nursing school, a sharp-tongued divorce attorney who saw through people faster than I could diagnose a blood clot. She was the only person who knew how deep the wounds in my family ran, the only one who had ever dared to name them out loud. I didn't plan to tell her everything that day, but as soon as she sat down and looked at me, something in me cracked. "He called me worthless," I said without preamble. She blinked once, leaned back in her chair, and said nothing. I kept going. I told her about the watch, the silence, the years of financial support, the absolute void where love should have lived. And then I told her about the photos, about Julie, about Emma. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. She picked up her coffee and took a slow sip, then said, "Melissa, this isn't just emotional abuse. It's manipulation. It's theft. You've been funding their lifestyle while he's out there playing house with a second family." I said nothing, just stared into my cup like the answers might float to the surface. Janine leaned in. "You've been protecting a man who doesn't protect you. You've sacrificed years of your life, your health, your peace, for people who don't even see you as human." I looked up, my throat tightening. "So what do I do?" Her voice didn't waver. "You stop paying. You cut them off. And then you make sure the people who matter know the truth." "That's revenge," I whispered. She shook her head. "No, that's liberation. Don't confuse your silence with moral high ground. It's just self-destruction dressed up as loyalty." Her words hit me harder than Dad's insult, because I knew she was right. I had confused being quiet with being good. I had confused being useful with being loved. I had been killing myself in installments for a family that only saw me as a transaction. That day, something inside me shifted. Janine didn't give me permission. She gave me clarity. And that was all I needed. I left that coffee shop knowing the next move was mine. The first thing I did when I got home that night was open my laptop and log into every single account I had ever linked to theirs: mortgage, utilities, internet, car payments, cell phones. One by one, I clicked through the tabs, breathing slower, deeper with each step. I canceled the automatic payment for the mortgage first. Then I removed my card from the electric and gas bills. I paused briefly at the car loan. For years, I had paid $600 a month for a vehicle I didn't drive for a man who never once thanked me. I called the loan provider and told them I was no longer responsible. They told me I wasn't listed officially, just the payments. Of course, they'd kept my name off the records, but not off the hook. I removed my information anyway. Then came the phone plan. I had paid for 4 lines my mom, dad, and Kyle. They'd all used my account, racked up charges, added upgrades, and never once paid a cent. I shut down every line but mine. I deleted their devices from the shared network. Next, the cable and internet. I disabled the streaming services, changed the passwords, and logged out every connected device. My Netflix, Hulu, HBO, even Spotify, gone from their TVs and phones. For every click, there was a memory. Every cancellation felt like a small rebellion. When I removed their address from my Amazon Prime, I remembered the winter I sent space heaters when the furnace broke. When I shut down their internet, I remembered Dad calling me because Kyle couldn't play Xbox. When I closed the cable account, I remembered paying the bill so they wouldn't miss Kyle's appearance on a local podcast that lasted 3 episodes. Every act of generosity had been treated like a given. Every act of care had been filed under duty. That night, I took it all back. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about power. It was about saying, finally, I am not your bank. I am not your maid. I am not your emotional punching bag. I am not worthless. I sent no message. I didn't warn them. I didn't explain. I let the silence carry the weight. And then I opened the folder, the one marked for later. I sorted the files, screenshots of text messages between Dad and Julie, photos of weekend trips, hotel confirmations. One picture of Emma holding a sign that read, "Love you, Daddy," in pink crayon. I didn't plan to leak them yet. I needed it to be strategic, controlled. I printed out copies and sealed them in an envelope. I labeled it simply, "Frank Cooper, the man you don't know." I addressed it to Aunt Karen, the matriarch of the extended family, the woman who believed in family values more than anyone. I wrote a second envelope for Uncle Mike, Dad's childhood friend and drinking buddy. I wanted allies. I didn't want rage. I wanted silence to break with truth, not vengeance. Then I wrote a letter, 1 page, handwritten, to my father. It read, "Since I am worthless, I will no longer provide. Since my presence holds no value, I will no longer attend. Since truth means nothing to you, let me introduce you to it." I didn't sign it with love. I didn't sign it at all. The next morning, I dropped the envelopes in the mailbox. No return address, no warning. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt light. Not happy, not free, but lighter. Like I had set down a backpack filled with bricks I had been carrying since childhood. I still didn't know what the fallout would be, but I knew this: I had stopped the bleeding. I had stopped giving. And now the reckoning was coming. The fallout came faster than I expected. 3 days after I mailed the envelopes, I received my first voicemail. It was from Mom, her voice tight and forced. "Melissa, the mortgage payment didn't go through. We're behind. You need to fix this. No greeting, no apology, just the panic of a plan unraveling." Then came Dad. His message was louder, angrier. "What the hell are you trying to prove? If this is about Christmas, get over it. Grow up." He didn't mention the photos, not yet, but the tension in his voice told me he knew. Then Kyle called. "You're ruining everything," he snapped. "My credit's screwed. I was gonna lease a car next month. Now I'm stuck." As if I had stolen something from him, as if his life was derailed because I had the audacity to stop paying for it. I didn't respond. I let the voicemails pile up. Some were angry, others manipulative. Mom left a longer one the following week, this time teary. "Your father's under a lot of stress. He's not sleeping. The electric might get shut off. Please, Melissa. Please. Then came the shift. Aunt Karen called. I got something in the mail, she said slowly. About your dad. Her voice was low, uncertain. We all did. There was silence. Then, is it true? I said yes. Nothing more. Just yes. And for the first time, I heard her exhale like someone realizing they'd been lied to for years. Word spread quickly. Uncle Mike called next, then Cousin Sarah, and then silence. From my parents. For 3 days, no voicemails, no texts, no guilt. I knew better than to believe it was over. On the 4th day, the doorbell at my apartment rang. I didn't answer. I watched from behind the blinds as my father stood there, shoulders hunched, a man stripped of his mask. He didn't knock again, just stood there for a moment, then walked away. That night, Mom called. I answered for the first time. How could you do this to us? She asked. No hello, no regret, just blame. I didn't do anything, I said calmly. I revealed what already existed. She was quiet. Then she said, You've destroyed this family. And I replied, No, I just stopped protecting its illusion. The next week, I learned they had to take out a loan to catch up on the mortgage. Dad picked up extra shifts at a warehouse. Mom increased her hours at the dental office. Kyle moved back in with them after being evicted from his apartment. He refused to work retail, said it was beneath him. I heard from Aunt Karen that the family dinners were quieter now. No more bragging. No more toasts. Just silence. The kind that settles in when the truth strips everything else away. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply continued with my life. I went to work. I slept through the night. I began saving my money for myself. I redecorated my apartment. I planted herbs on the windowsill. I began reading again, something I hadn't done in years. I even went out once to a small cafe with Janine, who raised her glass and said, "To liberation." I smiled, not with triumph, but with peace, because this wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was the natural order finally balancing itself out. I wasn't waiting for them to change anymore. They had shown me who they were, and I had finally painfully shown them who I was. Not a wallet, not a ghost, not a daughter begging to be seen. I was done, and they were paying the price of never having valued me when it mattered most. In the weeks that followed, the quiet became my sanctuary. For the first time in years, I woke up without my phone buzzing from emergency texts or guilt-laced voicemails. I made coffee and actually tasted it. I opened windows and let the cold air in. I bought myself a real bed, not the hand-me-down frame I had used since college. I took long showers without mentally calculating how many hours I had to work to make rent and pay someone else's bills. The absence of noise felt unfamiliar at first. My life had always been dictated by other people's chaos. Now the silence was mine to fill. Janine, as always, remained close. She helped me find a therapist who specialized in family trauma. I sat on the leather couch stiff at first, unsure of how to explain what I had endured. But the words came. Not in perfect order, not cleanly, but they came. I told her about being invisible, about the way love had been rationed in my house like oxygen, how every achievement was met with indifference, how every mistake from Kyle was treated like a temporary hiccup on the way to greatness. My therapist listened. She didn't rush me. One session, I told her about the guilt that still curled in my chest every time I spent money on myself. She asked, "Who taught you your worth was measured by what you give?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. We both knew. Over the following months, we unpacked the layers. The way I had learned to anticipate everyone's needs but never acknowledge my own. The way I had built a life around being dependable instead of being whole. And slowly I began to reclaim the pieces. I started saving not for them, but for me. I opened a new account. I called it the Freedom Fund. Each deposit felt like a victory. I also started saying no. No to overtime I didn't need. No to friends who only called when they were in crisis. No to the reflex of explaining myself. I went to yoga. I wrote in a journal. I sat in bookstores for hours. And eventually I laughed again. Real laughter. the kind that comes from somewhere deep untouched by obligation. One weekend, I took a solo trip to the coast. I stayed in a little Airbnb by the water, spent mornings walking the sand with coffee in hand, and nights eating whatever I wanted, watching old movies under a blanket. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post a single picture. That trip was just for me. On the last night, I watched the tide come in and thought about Emma, the little girl in the photo. I wondered if she would grow up knowing her father's lies. I hoped she wouldn't carry the same weight I did. I didn't hate her. I didn't even hate Julie. I just wanted something better for both of them than what I had lived through. Healing didn't come in a lightning bolt. It came in quiet, consistent choices. Choosing myself, again and again. Choosing peace over chaos, truth over silence, boundaries over guilt. Months later, I hosted a dinner in my apartment. Janine came. So did Aunt Karen and Cousin Sarah. They had reached out after everything came to light, offering not just support, but apologies. They said they hadn't known. They said they should have seen, and maybe they should have, but now they were showing up. Not for what I could give them, but just for me. We ate, laughed, shared stories. At the end of the night, Karen hugged me tight and said, "You're not invisible anymore, Melissa." That night I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally felt seen. For who I was. For what I had survived. For what I had built. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And after 33 years of waiting for someone else to validate my worth, I had finally given that power back to the only person who ever should have held it me. Thanksgiving came again, almost a year to the day since my father called me worthless in front of our entire family. But this time, I didn't pack a turkey. I didn't buy wine or iron a tablecloth or stress over perfect mashed potatoes. Instead, I opened my home to the people who had stayed. Janine brought pie. Aunt Karen brought flowers. Sarah brought music and laughter. We didn't sit in silence. We didn't dodge the past. But we didn't dwell in it either. We toasted to survival, to boundaries, to honesty. Michael came to a man I had met just a few months earlier, someone quiet and steady and kind in ways I had never experienced in a man before. On our third date, I had told him about my family. Not the sanitized version. The truth. I expected him to flinch or make excuses for them, but he didn't. He listened. He nodded. And then he said something I will never forget. Family is supposed to build you, not break you. If they broke you, they don't get to keep you. That one sentence undid years of guilt, because I had always thought walking away made me the villain, that standing up for myself meant abandoning them. But now I understood leaving was an act of preservation, not punishment. That Thanksgiving night after everyone left, I sat alone by the window, watching the soft glow of streetlights on fallen leaves. I thought of Dad. I didn't miss him. I thought of Mom. I didn't ache for her either. What I felt was quieter, a kind of distant mourning for the daughter I used to be the one who waited every year for them to finally see her. She was gone now, and in her place stood a woman who no longer begged to belong to people who had never earned her love. I used to think breaking the cycle meant changing them. Now I know it meant walking away, letting the dysfunction stop with me. It wasn't just about cutting off their bills. It was about refusing to pass on their legacy of conditional love and silent suffering. It was about choosing different, choosing peace, choosing myself. I didn't respond to the last message Mom sent weeks earlier. She had written, "This family is broken now. Hope you're happy." But I wasn't happy. Not in the way she meant it. I was healing. I was growing. I was learning how to live without being needed to feel worthy, and that was worth more than her approval ever was. One day, I might have a family of my own, children, a partner. Maybe not, but either way, I will never use love as a weapon. I will never make someone earn my care through sacrifice. I will never let anyone believe that silence is safety, and I will never again sit at a table where I am unwelcome simply because I share blood with the people seated there. Real family is not made by DNA. It is made by choice, by presence, by respect. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who gave you life but tried to steal your soul. My father thought he could define my worth with one sentence, but in the end, it was that sentence that freed me. I was never worthless. I was just never his.